Hi Year 11, I'm back by popular demand. 23 subscribers I'm at now, which is mad. I have decided to do a little video of the information which you studied when I was away on paternity leave last year. I handed out some of these today. I'll do a proper image of this in a bit so you can see it. But it's the Weimar Standards of Living, Women in the Weimar Republic and Cultural Changes. It's all of the content which is happening at the same time as Stresemann, policies like the Rent and Mark, the Dawes Plan, the Young Plan, etc. I think this is important because it could be one of the interpretation questions, so I think it's really important that we go over it. I'm not going to go through every single fact on the knowledge organiser I've handed out. I'm just going to go through a few things which I think could be really important. So starting with the standards of living, there were quite a lot of improvements, not huge improvements in the standards of living for workers, but some. Mainly, unemployment did decrease. It was at around 2 million people in 1924, and it did decrease to around 1.3 million, showing that in Weimar Germany they were successful at creating jobs. There was a scheme called the Unemployment Insurance Act in 1927, so towards the end of the time period, but 3% of workers' wages were taxed, and that money was used to give unemployment benefits, which were around 60 marks per week. It also gave sickness pay as well, so it's a really good example of welfare. The working week was reduced from 50 hours to 46, so workers would have to work 4 hours less per week for earning the same amount of money. And also real wages increased as well by 25%, and we have talked about real wages in class. That is basically the money you have left over after you've paid for rent, bills, taxes, anything like that. And that money could be used to purchase goods from shops, so that would also help boost the economy as well. There are some other facts on the sheet as well which you can read, but I think those are the main things to learn for standards of living. So if you had a source or an interpretation about standards of living, those facts are what you could use to evaluate the historian's view. Also, it talks about the changing role of women. Now, you'll remember from the new Weimar Constitution that women were able to vote in Germany for the first time. And 90% of all women in Germany voted in the first Weimar elections, and 10% of MPs in the Reichstag were female. So this was a huge change for women from life before World War One. Also in the new Weimar Constitution, Article 109, another article to remember, but this article gave women equal rights, also equal rights in marriage and equal rights to enter the same profession as men as well. Some success with this. Women did get positions in high power jobs, but not many. So, for example, there was only 36 female judges by 1933. The amount of female doctors did increase, 5,000 in 1932 compared to 2,500 in 1925. But still, there was a lot of inequality, particularly when it came to things like pay, and women weren't paid the same amount as men for doing the same job. Socially, women did experience lots of new freedoms. So many wore new fashionable clothing, sometimes quite revealing clothing. They had short haircuts. They'd wear makeup and jewellery, perfumes. They were able to go out and socialise, drinking and smoking without a chaperone, so they didn't have to be accompanied by men, which in the 1920s was incredibly forward-thinking. If you want a good word there, you could say it's incredibly liberal. And women seem less interested in marriage as well. There's a couple of other facts on the knowledge organiser about society being really divided over this. Lots of nationalists or conservative men wanted women to return back to a more traditional role. Also, there were huge changes with art and culture. So before World War One, art was incredibly traditional. It would often portray like German nationalism, German patriotism, victory in war, things like that. Whereas Weimar art was very expressive. It provoked discussion. It even portrayed defeat in World War One, which obviously nationalists wouldn't like. There were three main forms of art type which were new, which are things you would need to learn. New objectivism was the idea that art should not show a romantic view of the world, but should show the reality. So it showed things like unemployment. It showed the harsh conditions after World War One. It showed opposition to government and things like that. Modernism embraced the future and didn't just display pictures of the past, but thought about what the future might look like. And Expressionism reflected the thoughts and feelings of artists. So if an artist was angry at the response to the portrayal of women, then they might produce a piece of art which kind of reflected that. Also, there was huge growth in the amount of film. There were 3,800 cinemas showing film with sound. There's a couple of films that you could remember to use as facts. Metropolis being the first sci-fi film financed by the government. And also changes in culture also brought opposition. The left-wing thought too much money was being spent on arts, culture and architecture. That money should be spent on the people. The right-wing thought the culture was too liberal and didn't portray like the traditional values such as war, victory and the family, and they wanted to return to previous types of art. So those are the main bits of content. They are things which could potentially be a question in the exam next week. It's not a definite as anything, but I think it's just really important that you go over those and try and remember those ready for the exam. And if they do come up, then we've absolutely won by doing this video. Thank you very much.